I am 68 years old, and what I am about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about the creature white men call Bigfoot. My grandfather told me I would meet him one day. My great-grandfather saw him too, and his father before him. For generations, my people, the Nde, the Apache, have known the truth that your scientists and hunters refuse to accept. The being you search for with your cameras and guns is not an animal. He is not a monster. He is a guardian, a keeper of ancient knowledge. And for 43 years, since I was 25 years old and still believed I understood the world, one of these guardians has walked beside me, teaching me truths that would shatter your modern understanding of what is real and what is sacred. I have kept this knowledge hidden from outsiders because I knew what would happen if I spoke. They would call me crazy. They would send their scientists with their needles and cages. They would destroy the last sacred thing my people have managed to protect from the white man's hunger to own everything he touches. But I am old now, and my guardian is older still, and before we both return to the earth, I must speak this truth. Bigfoot is not hiding from you because he is shy. He is hiding because he remembers what your ancestors did to everything else that was sacred in this land. My name is James Nathoni, though my Apache name is the one that matters. Hashka Yilanava, which means angry he fights. I earned that name at 15 when I stood up to Bureau of Indian Affairs agents trying to take Apache children to their schools where they would forget their language, their songs, their souls. I have been angry my whole life, angry at what was taken, angry at what was destroyed, angry at how the sacred mountains of my people became national parks where rangers tell tourists lies about our history. But that anger began to transform in 1980 on a June night when the monsoon rains had just begun, when I met the one my grandfather called Gasconda, the tree spirit or forest brother. I was young then, filled with the kind of rage that eats you from inside. I had just returned from 2 tours in Vietnam, where I had been a scout, because of course they wanted Apaches to track in the jungle, to use our skills to kill people who looked more like us than like them. I came back broken, drinking too much, fighting too much, lost in a world that made no sense. The reservation felt like a cage. The mountains felt like the only place where I could breathe. So I went there, alone, to a sacred place my grandfather had shown me as a child, a canyon deep in the White Mountains, where our people had hidden from soldiers, where water springs from rock, where the old spirits still walk if you know how to see them. I had been camping there for 3 days, trying to drink away the ghosts of dead soldiers who visited me every night in my dreams. It was past midnight. The fire had died down to embers. I was drunk, angry, shouting at the stars, demanding to know why the Creator had let our people suffer so much, had let our land be stolen, our children taken, our sacred ways outlawed. I was screaming words my grandfather would have been ashamed to hear, mixing Apache and English, cursing everything and everyone. And then he answered, not with words, with presence. I felt him before I saw him, that same feeling my grandfather had described, like the air becoming heavier, like the earth itself was paying attention. The night sounds stopped, no crickets, no owls, no wind, just silence and breathing. Deep, slow breathing that wasn't mine. I turned, and there, at the edge of my firelight, standing between 2 ancient pines, was a figure that made my drunk mind suddenly, brutally sober. He was massive, nearly 9 feet tall I would guess now, though in that moment he seemed to fill the entire forest. His body was covered in dark, reddish-brown hair that seemed to absorb the firelight rather than reflect it. His face was not quite human, not quite ape, something ancient that belonged to neither category. But his eyes, God help me, his eyes were the eyes of an old man who had seen everything and mourned everything. They were the eyes my grandfather had in his last days when he knew our ways were dying. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I should have been terrified. I should have run. I should have grabbed my rifle. But instead, something else happened. I began to cry. Not the quiet tears of sadness, but the violent, body-shaking sobs of a man who has been holding too much for too long. I cried for my dead friends in Vietnam. I cried for my people's stolen children. I cried for the buffalo that used to cover the plains. I cried for every sacred thing that had been destroyed in the name of progress. And this creature, this being, this guardian my grandfather had promised I would meet, he walked forward into my firelight, lowered himself to the ground across from me, and waited for me to finish crying. When I finally could breathe again, when the sobs had turned to shuddering breaths, he reached out one enormous hand and placed it on the earth between us. Then he looked at me and made a sound, a low, resonant hum that I somehow understood wasn't a word, but a question. "Are you ready to learn?" I nodded. I didn't know what I was agreeing to, but I nodded. And so began 43 years of teachings that would change everything I thought I knew about the world. That first night, we sat across the fire from each other until dawn. He didn't speak, not in any language I knew, but he communicated in ways that went deeper than words. He would touch the earth, then his chest, then point to the stars. He would pick up stones and arrange them in patterns that somehow made sense to a part of my mind I didn't know existed. He would make sounds, not words, but tones, frequencies that vibrated in my chest and seemed to carry meaning directly into my thoughts. I learned later, much later, that this was how my ancestors communicated with his kind before we had words, before language divided us into separate peoples. When we were all just beings sharing the sacred earth, understanding each other through intention and feeling rather than vocabulary and grammar. As the sun began to rise, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold that reminded me why my people considered this place holy, he stood. I stood too, unsteady on feet that had been crossed for hours. He looked at me with those ancient eyes, and I understood. He was leaving. But he would return. This was not a single encounter. This was a beginning. Before he disappeared into the forest, moving with a silence that seemed impossible for something so large, he did something I didn't understand until years later. He took my hand, my small, scarred human hand, and pressed it flat against a smooth rock face at the canyon's edge. Then he placed his own massive hand over mine, pressing both into the stone. When he pulled away, I saw it. Our handprints, side by side, not carved, not painted, somehow pressed into solid stone as if it had been soft clay. Impossible, but there. I spent the rest of that day in shock, questioning my sanity, wondering if the combination of alcohol and trauma had finally broken my mind completely. I hiked back to my truck, drove to the reservation, and told no one. What could I say? Who would believe me? But 3 nights later, I found myself driving back to that canyon, back to that sacred place, carrying supplies I didn't remember buying. Apples, dried meat, bread, a warm blanket. I didn't know why I brought these things. I just knew I had to. He was there, waiting, as if he had known I would return. This time there was no fear, no shock. Just recognition. The way you feel when you see an old friend after years apart, a settling in the chest, a rightness in the world. He accepted the food I offered, eating the apples with a delicacy that seemed at odds with his size.
Then he gestured for me to follow. We walked for hours through terrain I thought I knew, but it never seemed like this. He moved through the forest like water, each step deliberate and silent. I crashed behind him like a drunk buffalo, breaking branches, slipping on rocks, breathing hard. He would wait patiently whenever I fell too far behind, never showing impatience or judgment, just waiting. Finally, we arrived at a place I'd never seen, a hidden box canyon with walls so steep and overgrown that it was invisible from any trail. And there, in that secret place, I saw others. 3 more of his kind. 2 adults and 1 juvenile, maybe the equivalent of a human teenager. They didn't run, didn't hide. They watched me with curious, intelligent eyes, as their guardian, my teacher, presented me like a father introducing his children to a trusted friend. The younger one approached first, bold in the way of youth everywhere. He came close enough to touch my face with 1 long finger, making a sound like a question. The adult female, I assumed she was female by her slightly smaller build and the protective way she watched the juvenile, made a low rumbling sound, not threatening, more like introducing herself. The other male stayed back, watchful, ready to intervene if I proved dangerous. I sat down right there in the dirt and leaves, making myself small and non-threatening. It was instinctive, the same way I would approach a scared dog or a spooked horse. And slowly, carefully, they came closer. The juvenile touched my hair, fascinated by its texture so different from their own covering. The female examined my hands, comparing them to her own. The cautious male eventually approached and did something that made my throat tight. He touched my military tattoo on my forearm, an eagle and the words Airborne Ranger, and made a low, mournful sound. Somehow, I understood. He was mourning. Mourning what humans do to each other. Mourning war. My teacher, I'd started thinking of him as Haston in my mind, which means old man or elder in Navajo, but felt right, sat beside me and began the real teaching. Using gestures, sounds, and that strange direct communication that bypassed words, he told me their story, or tried to. I didn't understand most of it that first day, but over the months and years that followed, pieces would come together like a puzzle made of memory and feeling, rather than wood and cardboard. They had been here first, long before humans, or maybe alongside the first humans. He was never clear on that, and I don't think time worked the same way in their understanding. They had watched humans evolve, change, spread across the earth. They had watched us go from beings like them, living with the earth, taking only what we needed, to something else, something hungry, something that consumed and destroyed and never stopped wanting more. They had tried to teach us once, long ago, had walked among the first peoples, sharing knowledge of plants, of seasons, of how to live in balance. Some humans remembered and honored these teachings. My people, the Apache, the Lakota, the Cree, the Cherokee, tribes whose oral histories spoke of forest giants or elder brothers who taught us sacred ways. But other humans, most humans, forgot. Or worse, they remembered but chose to ignore, chose domination over balance, chose ownership over relationship. And so his kind retreated, higher into the mountains, deeper into the forests, away from the spreading infection of human greed. They became shadows, myths, stories told around fires that most people no longer believed. They learned to hide so well that even when humans looked directly at them, they saw nothing. A trick of stillness and attention that was part camouflage, part something else I still don't fully understand. But they kept watching, kept hoping, kept waiting for humans to remember. That's why Haston had revealed himself to me that night while I was drunk and screaming at the stars, because in my anger, in my grief for what had been taken from my people, he heard an echo of their own loss.
He saw someone who might still understand, who might still remember the old ways. "You are Apache," he seemed to say with his eyes and hands in that strange wordless communication. "Your people know what it means to be hunted, to have your home destroyed, to watch your children stolen, to survive when everyone says you should disappear. You understand us because you have lived what we live." And God help me, he was right. The months that followed changed me in ways I couldn't explain to anyone in my life. I stopped drinking, I stopped fighting. People on the reservation noticed and asked what had happened. I told them I had found peace in the mountains, which was true, but not the full truth. How could I explain that I was being taught by beings that weren't supposed to exist? That I was learning a way of seeing and being that belonged to an age before roads and cities and the thousand ways we had learned to separate ourselves from the living earth. I began spending more time in the sacred canyon. I told my sister I was going to pray or doing ceremony, which was also true. She worried I was becoming too isolated, too much like our grandfather in his last years, when he would disappear into the mountains for days and come back speaking in old words even other Apaches didn't understand. But she didn't stop me. She knew I was healing from Vietnam in my own way. Aston taught me to move differently, to place my feet with intention, reading the ground before I stepped, to breathe in rhythm with the forest, to still my mind until I could hear things most humans never notice: the warning call of a jay, the shift in wind that means rain is coming, the subtle difference between a deer path and a bear path. These were skills my grandfather had tried to teach me as a child, but I had been too impatient, too eager to seem modern and educated. Now, with Haston's patient guidance, they came flooding back like memories stored in my bones rather than my brain. But he also taught me stranger things: how to sense presence without seeing, how to become so still that animals would walk past within touching distance, not fleeing, but simply not noticing me as a threat, how to press my awareness into the earth and feel the movement of things far away, a technique I can't explain, but that worked with a reliability that defied my scientific understanding. And he taught me about fear, human fear specifically. One night, maybe 6 months into our friendship, Haston led me to a spot overlooking a popular camping area. Down below we could see the glow of fires, hear the laughter and music of campers enjoying what they thought was wilderness. Haston pointed to them, then to himself, and made that throat-cutting gesture that seemed universal for danger and death. I understood. He was showing me why his kind stayed hidden. Those happy campers with their beer and their guitars would become terrified killers the moment they saw him, would grab guns and cameras, would call authorities, would transform from peaceful visitors to dangerous mob in seconds. Not because they were evil, but because they were human. Because humans are most dangerous when we're afraid, and we're always afraid of what we don't understand. He showed me proof: old scars covering his body, some from bullets, some from arrows, ancient scars from encounters with humans long dead, some from traps, some from burns, forest fires set by humans, deliberately or carelessly. His body was a map of human violence spanning not just decades, but centuries. The young one, Haston's son, I had learned something I could only approximate as caught, had fewer scars, but lived in constant fear. I watched how he jumped at every unusual sound, how he was never truly relaxed, how his eyes constantly scanned for threats. He had been born into a world where humans were everywhere, closing in, destroying habitat, filling the forests with noise and light and danger. He had never known the peace his father spoke of, when there had been places so remote that even humans couldn't reach them.
I felt ashamed of my species, ashamed of what we had done to creatures that had never sought to harm us. Haston must have sensed this, because he put his massive hand on my shoulder, a gesture of comfort that transcended species. Through that touch, I felt him communicate something profound. He didn't hate humans. He mourned for us. Mourned that we had lost our way so completely that we destroyed the very world that sustained us. Mourned that we were so afraid of our own smallness that we had to dominate everything around us to feel safe. The seasons turned. Fall came, painting the canyon in impossible reds and golds. I brought supplies, not just food anymore, but medicines. One of the adults had a bad infection in her foot. I cleaned it, used antibiotics I had gotten from a sympathetic doctor on the reservation by claiming I needed them for a hunting injury. It took weeks, but the foot healed. After that, they trusted me in a deeper way. Winter came, and I learned they didn't hibernate like the old stories claimed. They moved to lower elevations, to hidden caves and sheltered valleys where the snow wasn't as deep.
I tracked them, bringing food when hunting was hard. We sat together in caves while blizzards raged outside, communicating in our strange, wordless way, sharing body heat, sharing existence. Kat, the young one, became especially attached to me. He would play games, hiding and seeking, or offering me puzzles made of stones and sticks that I had to arrange correctly. Through him, I understood that his kind weren't so different from humans. They played, they laughed, a strange huffing sound, but definitely laughter. They grieved, they loved, they taught their young. They told stories through gestures and sounds that carried the weight of history. One spring day, Haston took me to a place I had never seen, a cliff face deep in the most remote part of the White Mountains. There, protected from weather by an overhang, were paintings, not made by humans. The hands that had created these were too large, the finger proportions all wrong. But the images were clear. Humans and forest beings living together, hunting together, dancing together, hands joined around fires. And then a change in the paintings, conflict, humans with weapons, forest beings fleeing, and then emptiness. The final painting showed the beings fading into trees, becoming shadows, choosing invisibility over extinction. This is what happened, Haston seemed to say. This is why we hide. I touched those ancient paintings and wept again, because I knew it was true, because I knew my own people's history was the same, forced to hide, to give up our ways, to become invisible to survive. The beings my grandfather called forest brothers and the Apache people weren't so different. We were both remnants of an older world that had no place in the new one, both trying to remember ways of being that the modern world wanted to forget. But there was one crucial difference. My people had to stay and adapt, our land stolen, but our presence undeniable. Haston's people could disappear completely, could choose extinction over exposure, and they were. There were so few of them left. It was in the third year of our friendship that everything nearly fell apart. A cryptozoology team from California had gotten funding for a major Bigfoot expedition in the White Mountains. They had sophisticated equipment, trail cameras with night vision, drones with thermal imaging, sound recording devices that could pick up vocalizations from miles away. They weren't weekend warriors playing in the woods. These were determined researchers with money and technology and the arrogance of people who believed capturing proof was more important than respecting the thing they sought to prove. I first heard about it at the tribal council meeting. A BIA representative was there, informing us that a research team would be operating in the mountains for 6 months. They had all the permits. Everything was legal.
They would stay out of areas sacred to the tribe, as if any of the mountains weren't sacred to us. But they expected to have minimal impact. I sat there in that sterile meeting room with its fluorescent lights and folding chairs, listening to this government man describe the expedition, and felt ice forming in my stomach. They were planning to search the exact areas where Haston and his family moved. The thermal imaging would pick up their heat signatures. The sound equipment would record their communications. The trail cameras would capture images that would change everything. And once proof existed, once Haston's people were confirmed as real, they would never know peace again. Scientists would come. Hunters would come. The military would come. These beings who had survived for thousands of years by staying hidden would be exposed, studied, dissected. The last refuge of an ancient people would become a circus. I tried to speak up in the meeting, tried to suggest that maybe this expedition should be delayed or relocated, but the BIA man waved me off. Mr. Natani, I understand your concerns about sacred sites, but this is a scientific expedition. They're not looking for artifacts or disturbing burial grounds. They're looking for an animal that probably doesn't even exist. An animal. They thought Hastine was an animal. After the meeting, I drove straight to the canyon. I didn't even go home first. I parked on a Forest Service road and hiked in, moving fast and careless, in a way Hastine had taught me not to be. I found him at our usual meeting place, and the moment he saw my face, he knew something was wrong. I explained as best I could, using English words. I spoke aloud even though he knew he couldn't understand them the way humans did, but the emotion and urgency would translate. I showed him with gestures, many humans coming, with eyes, cameras, with hearing, sound equipment, with flying things, drones, all looking for him, all wanting to prove he existed. I expected fear. What I saw instead was resignation, the look of someone who had known this day would eventually come. He had been fleeing human curiosity for so long that he knew it was only a matter of time before technology made hiding impossible. But then something else happened. Gott, now a young adult, stepped forward, and he was angry, angrier than I had ever seen him. He made sharp, aggressive sounds. He struck a tree with his fist hard enough to crack the bark. And then he looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt the accusation in his eyes. You are human. You brought this. How can you stop it? He was right. I was human, and my species was the problem. Hastine put a hand on his son's shoulder, calming him, but I could see the question in his eyes too. What could we do? The expedition was legal. The forests were public land. How could one broken Apache veteran stop a well-funded research team backed by universities and government permits? I didn't have an answer that night, but over the following weeks, I formulated a plan. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't sophisticated, but it was Apache, in a way my grandfather would have appreciated. I would become a coyote, a trickster. I started attending public meetings about the expedition, asking innocent questions. Where exactly would they search? What equipment would they use? When would they arrive? The researchers, eager to share their scientific methods, told me everything. I pretended to be a curious supporter, even donated a small amount of money to their project to gain trust. Then I went to work. I created false evidence in completely different areas. Fake footprints using carved wooden feet, recorded howls using sound files I edited and played through hidden speakers, even planted strands of fur from a dog mixed with bear hair in places miles from where Hastine's family actually lived. I made sure some of this evidence was accidentally discovered by locals who would report it. I started rumors in bars and diners about recent sightings in the wrong locations.
I also sabotaged. Not violently. I'm not proud of this, but I did it anyway. Trail cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. Drones had GPS errors that sent them off course. Vehicles broke down due to sugar in gas tanks or nails on remote roads. Nothing dangerous, just inconvenient enough to slow them down, frustrate them, waste their time and money. The expedition became a disaster. They spent 6 months chasing leads that went nowhere, documenting fake evidence that experts later debunked, dealing with equipment failures and bad luck that seemed almost supernatural. Local news started calling it a cursed expedition. The researchers left frustrated and empty-handed. Their funding dried up, their credibility damaged. I had won. Hastine and his family were safe. For now. But the victory tasted bitter, because I knew I couldn't do this forever. Eventually, technology would improve. Eventually, someone with enough resources and determination would succeed where this team had failed. Eventually, the secret would break and I wouldn't be able to protect them. Worse, my actions had consequences I hadn't foreseen. My sister figured out I was involved in the sabotage. She didn't know why, didn't know about Hastine, but she knew. She sat me down in her kitchen one afternoon and said, "James, what you're doing is illegal. You could go to jail. You could lose your tribal council position. Is it worth it?" I looked at her tired face, at her hands worn from years of hard work, at the pictures of her grandchildren on the wall behind her. And I knew I couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't say,
I'm protecting beings that have lived in these mountains since before our ancestors came here. I'm protecting the last remnants of an ancient people who taught our people sacred ways. I'm protecting something more important than laws or positions or my own freedom. So I lied. Said I didn't know what she was talking about. Said I was just praying in the mountains like always. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. She just hugged me and whispered, "Be careful. I don't want to lose my brother." That night, I went back to the canyon and told Haskin everything. Told him about the sabotage, about my sister's warning, about how I didn't know how much longer I could protect them. And he did something he had never done before. He embraced me. Those massive arms wrapped around my small human frame, holding me with a gentleness that belied their power. And through that embrace, I felt everything he couldn't say in words: gratitude, sorrow, love, and most of all, forgiveness. Forgiveness for being human. Forgiveness for belonging to the species that had driven his kind to near extinction. We stood like that for a long time, two beings from different worlds, knowing that our time together was running out. 25 years passed. The cryptozoology expeditions came and went. Technology improved. Satellite imaging, DNA analysis, motion sensors that could distinguish between different types of large mammals. The forests grew smaller as development crept higher into the mountains. What had been remote wilderness in my youth became dotted with vacation homes and hiking trails. The world changed, and not for the better. Hastin grew old alongside me. His hair went almost completely white. His movements became slower, more careful. Ka took over as the primary provider for their family, now with young ones of his own. The female, I had learned her name was something like Zihri, or strength, passed away one winter, her body wrapped in leaves and buried in a sacred place Hastin showed me only once. I grew old too. My joints ached from too many nights sleeping on cold ground. My eyes weren't as sharp. My hearing was going. But I kept the watch. Kept protecting, kept the secret. My sister passed away from cancer. My nieces and nephews asked why I never married, never had children of my own. I told them I had responsibilities they wouldn't understand. They thought I meant ceremonial duties.
In a way, I did. But the world was closing in. Last year, a wealthy developer bought thousands of acres adjacent to the national forest. Plans were filed for a massive resort. Luxury cabins, a golf course, trails, and a visitor center. Right where Hastin's family had their primary shelter. Right where the ancient paintings were hidden. Right where the last free beings on Earth still tried to live in peace. I fought it through every legal channel. Attended hearings, filed objections, got the tribal council to assert treaty rights. But money talks louder than old Indians, and the project was approved. I went to Hastin that night. My heart breaking. Told them they had to leave. Had to go deeper, higher, farther. Had to run again, like his people had been running for centuries. And I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Exhaustion. Not physical tiredness. The deep soul exhaustion of someone who has run too long, hidden too much, sacrificed everything, and knows it still isn't enough. He took my hand and led me to the cliff paintings. In the dim light of my LED flashlight, so different from the fires his ancestors had painted by, he pointed to the images of his people fading into trees. Then he pointed to himself, to his family, and I understood. They weren't going to run anymore. They were going to fade. "No," I said aloud, my voice cracking. "No, you can't give up. We'll find another place, But he stopped me with a gesture. And then he did something extraordinary. He spoke. Not in grunts or howls or wordless communication. In English. Broken, harsh, like vocal cords not designed for human speech, but unmistakable English. Time is over. I fell to my knees. In 43 years, he had never spoken words I could understand. And now at the end, he chose to bridge that final gap between our worlds to tell me it was over. Your people won. Not with guns, with everywhere. No place left. No forest safe. No home remaining. There has to be somewhere, I pleaded. Alaska, Canada, somewhere humans haven't. All places have humans now. We are the last. Kot's young ones will not survive. Better to fade with honor than captured in cage. He was telling me they had made a choice. They would rather disappear completely, die out, than be discovered, studied, imprisoned. They would rather become mythology than reality in a human world. Why? I asked through tears. Why did you reveal yourself to me all those years ago, if this was always going to be the ending? Haston paced his hand over my heart. When he spoke again, his words came easier, as if he was remembering how. So one human would know, would remember, would carry the truth that we were here, that we were real, that we were worthy, not animals, not monsters, brothers. And then I understood the full weight of what he was giving me. Not just friendship across species, but testimony, proof, memory. I was his people's last witness, the only human who would know they had existed as more than myths, that they had been intelligent, emotional, worthy of respect and protection they would never receive. He reached into a pouch he wore, woven grass, simple but beautiful, and pulled out something I had never seen before. It was a small carving, made from bone or antler, showing a human figure and a forest being standing side by side. Between them was a symbol I recognized from Apache tradition, the symbol for brother or family. For you, he said, remember. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. That was the last time I saw Haston alive. 3 months ago, I found his body. He had gone to the sacred place where Zile was buried and laid down beside her. By the time I found him, the forest had already begun to reclaim him, leaves and moss covering his form, insects doing their work, the earth accepting him back. I sat beside him for hours, saying prayers in Apache, thanking him for everything he had taught me, asking the Creator to welcome him home.
I looked for Ka'at and his family, but they were gone. Whether they had moved on to try their luck in some remoter place, or whether they too had chosen to fade, I don't know. I searched for weeks, called out with the sounds Haston had taught me, left food and signs. Nothing. Just silence and the empty forest. Now I am 68 years old. I have cancer. The doctors give me maybe a year. The developers are breaking ground on their resort next month. The ancient paintings will be destroyed or discovered and put in a museum. Context lost, meaning erased. Everything Haston tried to protect will soon exist only in my memory. But before I die, I needed to tell this truth. Not to prove anything, not to restart the hunt for Bigfoot or give cryptozoologists new leads to follow, but to testify. They existed. They were real. They were not animals, but people. Different people, yes, but people. With language and culture and history and souls. And we destroyed them not with malice, but with something worse, with the simple, thoughtless expansion of human existence into every last wild place on Earth. What your white scientists call Bigfoot, what my people called forest brothers, what Hastin called his family, they are gone now, or nearly gone. The last remnants of an ancient people who chose dignity over discovery, chose extinction over exhibition, chose to fade into legend rather than live as specimens in your world. You wanted to know if Bigfoot is real. I'm telling you, he was real. But your belief or disbelief doesn't matter anymore, because while you were arguing about whether he existed, he disappeared. The Apache have a word, the Ase. It means the sacred way, but also the dying way. The understanding that some things must pass so others can come. Hastin taught me that his people accepted this. They had lived thousands of years. They had seen countless generations rise and fall, and they knew their time was ending. They made peace with it in a way humans never could, because they understood something we forgot, that we are all just temporary visitors on this earth, and the mark of wisdom is knowing when to leave gently rather than destroying everything in a desperate attempt to stay forever. I carry his carving with me always. After I die, I've arranged for it to be buried with me in the traditional Apache way, in a secret place, no marker, no record. Let it return to the earth like Hastin did. Let the truth fade with me. Because I've learned that some truths are too beautiful, too sacred, too painful to survive in the world humans have created. Your beliefs don't need turning upside down. They need to grieve. Grieve for what was lost while you were debating whether it ever existed. Grieve for the questions you'll never get to ask, the meetings that will never happen, the knowledge that died with beings you mocked as myths. Grieve for a world that was once wild enough to hide mysteries, and for what we became when we paved over every mystery until nothing remained but the ordinary cruelty of human dominance. I am Hashge Yil Naba. Angry he fights, and I am angry no longer, just sad. Sad that I was the last human friend of the last of his kind. Sad that this testimony is both proof and elegy. Sad that by the time you read this, both Hastin and I will be gone, and the truth will just be another story no one quite believes. The forest brothers walked among us. They were real. They were worthy. And we killed them with indifference and parking lots. That is the truth that should turn your beliefs upside down.